There's one thing more I wanted to say, but can't think of it. Or clothing. Everybody was poor, and I don't know if the clothing and the shoes were poor quality, but it seemed like my shoes and my pants wore out so rapidly. I thought they just weren't very good. It may have been because I ran around too much. But I can remember wearing one of the most embarrassing things, my pants would wear out in the crotch first. And then before Mom could find me a new pair of pants, well, I had to be careful. And we couldn't afford, well, we didn't have any. We'd never heard of galoshes. Now, who knows what galoshes are? Do you know what galoshes are?
Overshoes.
Overshoes,
Yeah.
Overshoes with metal buckles on.
Hmm.
Those came along, and we were able to protect our feet so we wouldn't get all wet. Then we had to, of course, walk to school in all kinds of weather. And I can remember one time my brother saw that there was a bad storm coming, so he let us out of school at 3 o'clock instead of 4:15, and we started home. I had to walk west on King Road till I got to Matthews Road and go south on Matthews Road to get home, which was about almost a mile. The snow was so, and the wind was so strong that it stung your face. You could not walk facing it. We had to walk backwards. It was snowing awfully hard. And we got home and it snowed all day, all that night, all the next day, into the next night. And we got up in the morning, everything was out of sight. We had about 2 feet of snow on the ground. And so, no school. That was all right, except we had to shovel snow. We had to shovel a path to the barn to take care of the cows. And then we couldn't go any place for a week. Finally, my dad says, we got to get out and get some groceries. So he hitched up the team of horses to the hay wagon, and he took a walking plow and hooked it to the back of the wagon right in line with the wheel. And he plowed a furrow across the field north to King Road, turned around, came back again, plowed the other direction. And then we put chains on the Essex. We were able to get out of there. But there was still no school because the north-south roads were all blocked with deep, deep drifts. In fact, when we did start going to school, we could walk across the field and over the fences on the snowbanks. We didn't have to go down the road. We just walked over across the snow because we had a slight thaw and then a crust formed and then more snow on top of it. So that was, and we could dig beautiful caves in the snow. So that was a lot of fun. Well, I got out of grade school when I was 13, and then I started high school that fall of 1934, and I was 13 then. And this was tough on me. I was so bashful, but I still wanted to do it. No problem there. But I had to walk to school, and it was, well, almost 2 miles from Matthews Road to Spring Harbor. At times, sometimes I would walk to school with rubber boots on, carrying my shoes. And then when I got to school, and I found a place to stow my boots and put on my shoes. And then we had to walk in blizzards. And to my surprise, I was in the freshman class, and they voted me president of the class. probably because nobody else wanted to be called president because they might have to do something. So I was president for the first semester in my high school class. My high school class. My teachers, I liked some of them. Some of them talked too much. But particularly liked Professor Ehlert, who taught general science and physics. And I met a friend, Robert Warner, who was the son of Bishop Warner of the Free Methodist Church. And we were great friends, and we went to the physics lab. We got all the equipment working again. Nobody had done anything with it for I don't know how long. There were all kinds of things. There were radio, and there was a static machine to generate static electricity. There were things that demonstrated magnetism, and we got everything working. It's especially fun was the static machine. You would build up a voltage that would jump a spark 2 inches. So in those days we wore rubbers over our shoes, real rubber, which were a great insulator. So the bravest of us could take a jolt out of that static machine and then go upstairs and touch some girl and make her jump because she'd take the spark. We got the radio going, and it was a bare radio with the coils and the tuning condenser and everything right out in the open, the dials on the front. We got that working. Then we had a fair, a science fair, for the benefit of parents and students. And one of my greatest achievements was to make a hot dog cooker. I just took a board and drove 2 nails, a nail in each end of it, about as long as a hot dog. And then you'd stick the hot dog down over the nails, and then you'd plug the thing into a light socket, and within moments, now this would not have passed the underwriters. Within moments, that hot dog was smoking hot, and you could eat it. We sold hot dogs, but nobody questions the safety of the thing. Another thing I did that really impressed people was to make a magnetic cannon. I took a tire pump. I think it's a small pump like used for bicycle tires, and the whole big tube was of plastic. See, I don't mean plastic. I mean brass. It was brass. So brass is not magnetic. Then I got Model T Ford spark coils that weren't used anymore, and wound a solenoid. Of course, everybody knows what a solenoid is. Many turns of wire on this brass tube. Then I had somebody cut for me a slug of annealed iron, soft iron, about 3 inches long, and it was about almost an inch in diameter. Greased the inside of the tube, and then when I would touch this to the battery, it magnetized this and it would seek the center, and just as I figured it was going to hit the center instantly almost, I would release the switch, and then the slug would go flying out the end of the tube. Not enough to hurt anybody, but people marveled at that. They couldn't figure out how that worked. Then my studies, my teachers, I got A+ in science from the professor, and then along came Professor Miller, and he taught the next higher thing in general science, physics, and he was really good, but he was not up on this kind of thing. He really wasn't. He he learned a lot. I taught him a lot. Bob Warner and I taught him a lot. He taught the teacher. So he furthered my ambition in the way of electronic and electrical stuff. I liked English. I liked my English teacher very much because she was Bob Warner's sister, and she wore tight sweaters, and she was cute. So that motivated me to not miss class. Then we had the old maid teacher. I didn't like her much. She went on forever and never told us anything. My algebra teacher I didn't like. She turned out to be a bad woman. And my geometry teacher was better. He was Mr. Schwarzentraub. He was a good teacher, so I got along good in geometry, but she almost, I think I got a C+, lowest grade I ever got in algebra. The social functions at the school were limited. The girls couldn't let their knees show with their dresses, and the boys always had to wear long sleeves, and we always usually wore a sleeveless sweater over a shirt, and we had to couldn't wear blue jeans or anything like that. And we had to be quiet in the study hall. We spoke when we were spoken to. Couldn't walk down the sidewalk with a girl. And besides, then who wanted to? At my age, I didn't care about that. Some of the guys did. Then on Friday nights, it was the big night. It's when the literary people, they had declamatory contests, oratory contests. What else did they have? Where they emoted, and there was one girl that was really good. She won prizes, and I thought, boy, and she was older than I, and she was out of sight. She was a college freshman when I was a high school freshman. But to me, she was out of sight as far as ever getting acquainted with her.
What was her name?
Her name was Pauline Jones. I wasn't very enthusiastic about the Jones name, because that's what we called the toilet in those days. It was the Jones.
It wasn't the John?
It wasn't the John, it was the Joneses, keeping up with the Joneses. But I was impressed by her because she was the same one that I taught to pick raspberries. So that was, then, so I had no interchange with her at all because she was upperclassman and I was just a kid. Why she wasn't attracted to me, I don't know. Simply because she was too educated and sophisticated to pay attention to a little farm boy. So that's the last I saw of Pauline Jones for years. Well, I finished high school with real good grades, but we were just recovering from the Depression. I graduated in 1938, and no money to go to college for me. Girls could get jobs and boys couldn't. So I was unsettled with what to do. My dad had bought a brand new Ford Ferguson tractor, which I liked. I liked farm work, except cleaned out the stables and things like that, and the chicken coop. So what to do? If I did my work cheerfully, I sort of enjoyed it, taking care of the animals and using the plow and and the drag. In fact, I could plow so fast with the Ford Ferguson tractor that it laid the furrows right over smooth, so I didn't have to use the drag afterwards. It just threw the dirt up out of the ground and threw it a level. Didn't have to use the drag on it if the ground was right. But what happened was, one night was the day I turned 18, in 1939. A car came charging down the muddy dirt road on February the 3rd, and it was a salesman selling electronic courses, study courses, mail, with a final thing of going to Detroit and going to the big laboratory. Mm-hmm. So, to my surprise, my dad bought the course for me. I have no idea how much it cost. But he took an interest in me, my ideas, because I did things with radios. Even before I started the radio course, I had an intercom set up between the house and the barn with two speakers and a battery. The ground was one wire. One single wire strung was the other conductor. And so I could talk, you could hear what's going on in the barn. So he was impressed with that. Mm-hmm. And so he bought that for me. And the first thing my pa did, across the driveway from the house was the packing building. It was a building about 24 by 12.
You pack the fruit there to sell?
Yeah.
And you can it there, or pack fresh fruit?
No, we just packed it for shipping.
Okay. It was fresh.
No, we didn't can anything. It was where we sorted the apples and sorted the grapes, put the grapes in boxes, and sorted the apples and put them. And it had a deep basement with a dirt floor. So it was ideal for storing fruit. In fact, it was designed to store fruit with a ventilating system and everything. Mm. So that's where we put the bushels and bushels and bushels of apples for them to ripen, and so we'd have them to sell in the spring. And so in the one end of the packing house, it was my workroom, and he built the most beautiful big workbench for me you ever saw. And of course, we had no electricity in those days. So to put together radios and electronic equipment, I had to solder wires. So I was very resourceful. I'd take the carbon center out of a flashlight battery, sharpen the end of it, put a clamp on the other end, and run 2 wires out to the pickup truck, which I'd park by the window, and clip onto the battery in the pickup truck. So, and then I had the wires that came in. One went to the little electrode, the carbon thing. The other I would clamp onto the chassis or the part I was going to solder. So I could just touch that right there and draw a little bitty arc, and immediately it got hot and I could solder. I soldered all the connections with that makeshift soldering iron. I got excellent grades. Grades were all perfect. And the time came. In the meantime, of course, I worked on the farm with my pa. My brother Peter was still in high school. I enjoyed the farm work. One thing that I was kind of strange was I didn't like to mess up my hands, so I got my dad to buy me goatskin gloves to wear, leather gloves to wear. And I wore sport clothes instead of overalls and blue jeans. Summer sport clothes. And so, time came when I was supposed to go to the school in Detroit.
How long did it take you to do the course?
I did it. I did it in a year or less. Yes, a year, because the we knew that I had to go to Detroit to finish up. So my dad gave me about 3 or 4 acres of ground near the house, and I cultivated it up, and I planted pickles,
Cucumbers?
cucumber, and the ground was real good ground. They grew like mad, and I would pick the cucumbers when they're about 2 inches long. That's when you got the most money out of them, but you got less cucumber by weight, but you got more money. So I'd pick all these cucumbers and take them to Parma to the processing plant where they would sort them, and I get paid. And I earned $300 that summer, which in those days was quite a bit of money. And that was my money I was going to go to Detroit on. So in the spring of 1939, is that right? No, in the spring of 1940. It had to be the spring of 1940. My dad put me on the bus at Slim Burroughs' garage in Spring Arbor. That's where the Greyhound bus stopped. And I went to Detroit. Was I scared? I'd been to Detroit a few times with my brother when he took loads of chickens in to sell at the Detroit farmers markets. But to make myself a way around, I was unsure of myself. In fact, I decided I don't know where I'm going to be when I get there, so I'll go to the YMCA. So I get off the bus station and get in a taxi and says, take me to the YMCA. What I didn't know at the time was the YMCA was about 3 blocks away. So the guy drove me around a while and then dropped me in front of the YMCA.
And he charged you money.
And he charged me for it. Then the place where I was going to go to school was on Woodward Avenue, 4004 Woodward Avenue. I had no idea how far that was from the YMCA, so I had what was called a Gladstone leather suitcase that my mother had bought me. And so I started out, and that thing was heavy. It had all my belongings in it. And I started walking up Woodward Avenue. I walked 40 blocks up north on Woodward Avenue to Forest Avenue, went into the building, and the school was upstairs, up the 2nd floor. And they welcomed me and told me where to get a room. So just half a block away was a boarding house. Not a boarding house, a rooming house. All I got was a room. And it had a bed that folded into the wall.
A Murphy bed?
I don't know what they called it. And so when you let the bed down, you didn't have any room hardly to move around. But there was a sink. There was a sink in the room. So I could wash and shave in there. But the bathroom was down the hall. So I lived on $1 a day for food, $3 a week for my room. And I ate the same thing every day. There was a White Castle on the corner where I had some breakfast. Cornflakes and milk and a glass of orange juice. That was my breakfast. I think it cost me 15 cents. And then I'd been exploring Detroit, and I went downtown to Grand Circus Park. And downtown Detroit, then it was very flourishing. Everything was beautiful, busy. Found a little restaurant where I could go in and get a meal for 35 cents. So 5 cents on the bus with a return stub. and I'd go downtown to eat. But in the laboratory, I was amazed. Surprised that I found girls in there, at least one girl, maybe two. I didn't know girls could learn that kind of thing. But in this training there, we had lectures and we worked on the lab equipment. And I learned everything. I learned high power. I learned high power switching because part of our work was for broadcast radio, high powered radios. So we learned high powered equipment, three-phase current, switching gear, and protective equipment. And then I had to learn plumbing too, because all this heavy duty equipment is cooled with water or some kind of a solution. It would be distilled water. So I learned an awful lot there, stuff I'd never even heard about. So I'd only been there about 3 months when they said, "We think we've got a job for you. Go out on East Outer Drive in Detroit and go to Weltronic Corporation, and they want a person to work in the laboratory. I mean, person to work on the production." In those days, production was you do it yourself. So what I would have to do, I had to learn to talk on the telephone. That was one thing that was really strange to me, to talk on the telephone. And I had to stop saying ha, and nope, and things like that. So they would throw an envelope on my desk, a big envelope. In it would be a schematic, which is an electrical diagram, and a mechanical diagram, and that was it, and a list, a parts list. So I would have to take the mechanical thing back to the tin shop or the metal shop, and they would cut the metal and bend it up into a chassis for me, the size of the drawing. And, well, actually, before they bent it, I had to take it to the drill press. I had to spray paint, or whatever they call that stuff you put on it. It's like they use for, it was a violet color. It was ink of some kind. And then I would, with a ruler and a tape measure, I would mark out the holes to be drilled for the parts to be mounted.
Mm-hmm.
Then I'd take it, and then I had to tap the holes at the drill press with a tapping device on the drill press. And that was a little bit to learn, was stop breaking taps. You're very gentle when you're using a tapping machine. Probably nobody listening to me knows what that is.
So drill the threads, right? And
Yeah.
for a screw, yeah, tap and down.
Then I'd take it back and they'd bend it. Unless it was a flat plate, then they didn't have to bend it. A lot of the chassis were just flat plates, and they were fastened into an electrical box. And then they would take it. I had to take it to the painter, and he'd paint it with gray wrinkle finish, gray wrinkle paint. It came out gray wrinkled, a nice finish. Then I took it to my bench, and I mounted all the parts on it, according to the diagram. And then I wired it according to the diagram. And then when the time came, I plugged in all the radio tubes, and it already had the capacitors and the resistors and everything on it. And then I plugged it into the socket. If it didn't smoke, I was successful. That didn't mean it was going to work right, but at least success, it didn't smoke or blow up. So then I had to put it into operation, make it do its. Actually, they were sequencers for resistant spot welding. timing devices. It had four timing devices that were adjustable from 0 to 60 cycles. It was for guns, welding guns. The timing intervals were called squeeze, weld, hold, or cool, and off.
What were the welders used for? For the automobile industry?
Put the automobiles together.
In Detroit,
right?
yeah.
Put all the seams together.
That makes sense.
They're pinched welders. You've probably seen them in the movies. You ever seen sparks flying from pinch welders?
Uh-huh.
I think they still do a lot of it that way. I don't know of any other way to do it. So that was a simple one. Some of them were really simple. It only did one thing. They timed the weld. And the other sequencing was done with air and pressure switches, so on. But they preferred the complete device that electronically timed the intervals because they were readily adjustable. You just turned the knob to get the different time intervals. I was real successful at that. I did a very neat job of wiring, and if you wired it, you laced it up. And you made the wiring look straight and good, and the joints, solder joints, had to be perfect. A lot of the guys that worked there couldn't make a decent solder joint for some reason. So I had about 6 guys that were working at the same kind of work, and I was the best. So on a bigger device, we always had competition. Who was going to get the most complicated thing to put together and get it working? So if it was a complicated device, like to weld real heavy material, then you added some more time. You added an annealing time where the big welding press actually hammered the metal while it was still warm. Hammered it by sequencing the air valves that operated the cylinders that closed the points on the metal. And so if it was real important, then I had to go down to the factory in Detroit, whether it was Ford or Fisher Body or Chrysler Corporation, in these places where we sold the things, and I would install it and get it working myself. That was real important. So then it got so that whenever the engineer desired had invented something new in the way of a control for some special purpose, then he would give me the schematic, and I have to win. This would be real complicated with 6 or 8 tubes on it, electronic tubes. Nowadays, nobody knows what an electronic tube is. Never see them.
A vacuum tube?
Vacuum tubes.
Yeah.
And he would have me wire it, and it didn't work. And I'd tell him it didn't work. And I had it all wired up and laced up real neat, and I'd give it back to him and says, "Don't work." And he would tear it all apart and find out where he made the mistake. He made the mistake himself. And then I'd have to put it back together again, make it look decent. His name was Gus Undy. My boss's name, the company president's name was Cletus Collum. And my boss's name, I can't think of it. Anyway, I always knew more than my bosses. I didn't know more than the engineers, but it got to the point where I did the engineering myself. So that's what I was doing when World War II came along. In the meantime, I was making enough money, so I bought a brand new 1942 Special Deluxe Sport Coupe, beige color, beautiful car.
Now, who made that?
Pardon me?
Who made it?
Chevrolet.
Chevrolet.
What I liked about it, that model, was it looked almost like a Cadillac. The different makes of cars, their different models were very similar, just maybe bigger or more chrome on them or something like that. That was a beautiful car. And I loved to drive it. Well, I didn't have it very long until I was sent on a rush service run downtown Detroit. I think I was going to Fisher Body, which no longer exists. It was General Motors. They built bodies for General Motors. And it was zooming down the railroad streetcar tracks. All the main streets had streetcar tracks down the middle. And you could get along and get faster if you stayed on the tracks. But it was a little hard because you get your wheels on the tracks and the car would sort of swerve around. And I came down under the bridge at Grand Boulevard, come up out of the hollow there, and there a big Buick pulled right out in front of me. And my tires squealed, and I hit him.
Oops.
Right in his front fender. It didn't bend the Buick very much, but it sure bent my Chevrolet. That was a heartbreaker. But I happened to be right near Chevrolet dealers. So they came and got the car and repaired it. In the meantime, of course, I'd gotten insurance with State Farm Insurance Company.
Before or after the wreck?
Before.
Oh, before.
Yeah, I was insured when I hit that.
Good.
But the guy pulled out in front of me. And he stopped. And I couldn't swerve over to the left. I'd be hitting in oncoming traffic. And it was right on the tracks, along the tracks at the main intersections was a walk with a rail where people waited to get on the streetcar. Couldn't go that way because I'm right beside that walk. Couldn't go to the left because oncoming cars. So I had to plow into him. I remember that the steering wheel flew up and hit me in the face and I had a swelled up lip.
Mm.
That's all that happened to me. But that made me more cautious. And it was about then, in fact, previous to this occasion. This was the summer of '42 when this happened. Previous to this, I'd go home to see my parents in Spring Arbor about once a month. Other times I and my friends would go here and there for a weekend of fun. And I was a great bowler and all that stuff. And we went to the resort areas, Traverse City and Ludington and places like that. The guys danced, but I left out a part of the story. When I signed up in the Navy in June 1942, which I don't know if it's in the other story I told you before, I started taking dancing lessons. Arthur Murray, teach you dancing in a hurry, at the beautiful, prestigious Statler Hotel in Detroit. Of course, then I had very nice clothes. Nicer. The clothes for young men then were a lot more attractive than they are now. I don't know what happened to the elastic trousers and the sport shirts we had then. And my badge, most of the time I wore moccasins. I had white moccasins and brown moccasins and black moccasins. And because, of course, it wasn't bare leather on the bottom, they had another layer of leather. They had a sole to them. But when I went dancing, I had to have different shoes on. Anyway, my friend Tom O'Brien, who went in the Navy, and he worked where I did at Weltronic, he said, Zeller, you've got to learn to dance. If you're going to be a Navy officer, you just have to know how to dance, because that's you have to be in the social end of it. So I started taking dancing lessons, and that was fine. Girls were beautiful,